Hi everyone, Willie McGillicuddy Pine Jr. here from Pine Brothers Lumberyard. You know, people come up to me and say, "Hey Willie, you got any lumber?" And I say, "Sure, how much you need?" And they say, "Well, how much you got?" And I say I'd have to check that because our inventory changes on a daily basis due to fluctuations in market demand. And they say, "Okay, then just give me a couple 2x4s. And then we share an awkward laugh and move on with our days. Don't know the difference between eastern or western red cedar? Don't worry, we'll help you out. Can't tell what's walnut and what's sassafras? No problem, we got you covered. Need some mesquite? Well, too bad, we don't carry none of that second-rate garbage. Oh, Willie, you gone done it again. Got yourself all worked up about nothing. I'm sorry, folks. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention, for a limited time only, any purchase over $50 gets you a talking doll of our mascot, Piney the Tree. Sycamore? More like sicka less, right? Right? Is this thing on? Look, the point is this. Whether you need a toothpick or a log cabin, we'd sure love your business here at Pine Brothers. So come on down Route 27, exit 35, 73rd tree on the left. You can't miss us. Pine Brothers, we got a lot of trees. Hey everyone, this is Dave from the Adobe Character Animator team, and in today's video, we're going to be walking through this character, Willie. He is a free downloadable character on the OK Samurai Puppets page, so you can go and download him and follow along with me as I kind of dissect him and show how he works behind the scenes. And all we're going to do today is walk through 5 techniques that I've added to this character that are a little more advanced, and some of these have shown up in other tutorials before, but I want to put them all in one place to show just some additive things you can add into your character to give them a little extra emotion and quality of animation and all that good stuff to really help it add one more level of professionalism to your characters. So let's start off with the eyes. You'll notice that Willie's eyes, his pupils, are not in the center of the eyeballs, right? They're kind of off-center. They're a little bit closer to the nose. And this is a common way that professional cartoons will do the eyes. But you'll see as I look left and right and up and down and all of that, the character should be mimicking and moving their eyes around. So let me change in eye gaze to keyboard input instead. And I can see up, down, left, right. All of those are looking pretty good. The problem is off-center eyes don't work well for diagonals. So when I press down and left, for example, ooh, that does not look good. Something's wrong with him there, or up or left, and any of those are not going to look good. So what can you do in this situation? You want to have offset eyes. This looks like a better default instead of just in the middle, but I also want to be able to do some diagonal eye rolls and all of that. And so the way I've gotten around this is I've turned those pupils into draggables. All right, so what I would do in rig mode here is over under eye gaze, I'm just gonna get rid of this. I'm gonna click the little menu icon, click remove behavior, and eye gaze is gone. I wanna control the pupils a little bit differently. So I'm gonna find those pupil layers, and instead of pupil, I'm going to get rid of these tags, and I'm instead going to tag them as draggable, which is down here. And let's do the same thing to the right side. Get rid of those tags. I don't need it to be a pupil. I just want to be able to drag it. All right, so now when I go back to the scene, I can see that I can drag each of these pupils independently and move them however I want. So I can make them look, absolutely ridiculous if I wanted to. But the point is I want to, now I have full control over where exactly those pupils are going to go. So let's say I want this to be my default, like this. So what I'm gonna do is I'm going to disarm everything. I'm holding down Command on Mac or Control on Windows and clicking the red dots to disarm everything. And then the only one I'm going to arm is Dragger over here. And so I'm gonna set my eyes in the position I like. That looks pretty good, something like this. And then I'm going to record for a second. Or I can press Command 2, which is what I normally do. Shortcut to do a 2-frame take. That's on Mac, Command 2 on Mac, Control 2 on PC. Let's zoom in here and let's just extend this a little bit. And now I have this 1 second clip, this 1 second recording basically of the eyes in this default state. Okay, cool. So now let's move on to about 2 seconds. And let's change them. Let's say, what is he going to look when he looks right? So on to his right, not the right of the screen. So I'm going to drag these to exactly where I want them to be. I'm going to press Command 2, and now I've got another setup, and I'm going to do that for about a second as well. Then let's move to 4, and let's just kind of go around the horn here. So I'm going to do diagonal up like this, and Command 2, get that 2-frame take, extend it a little bit, and let's move on. And so you can see what I'm doing. I'm just going to keep on going around until I have recordings, 1-second recordings for every one of these pupil positions that I want, these custom pupil positions. All right, so I've done all of that. I have all my different eye positions here. Let's press minus a few times to zoom out. And I can collapse these little dragger things. I don't need to see the whole, staircase of every single take that I did. I only wanted to see the single consolidated row. And now I'm gonna add blending to all of them. So I'm gonna select them all, marquee select them, press plus a few times to zoom in. And I'm gonna do a quick blend, just a couple of frames in the front, and then a longer blend in the end. This is just gonna be the smoothest transition between the different states. So now that I have all these, what I can do is select them, right click, and let's say we want to create a replay and trigger. So I'm gonna do that. It's gonna create a new replay down here and I wanna make sure that's set to stop sustain. So make sure it's selected down here and it says stop sustain. It should do that by default, but in case it doesn't. And I'm gonna call this over here on the right-hand side, let's press enter and call this our default pupil position. So something like that. Now, I want this to be part of a swap set because we don't want multiple eye positionings happening at the same time. We want only one at a time. So I'll press plus up here, create swap set, and let's call this swap set pupils. And then I would drag default pupil in here and make that my default. So that is going to be the one that always shows up. Now what I can do is go through each of these other ones and add them to this swap set. So here's my next one. I believe this was looking to the right. So I'm going to select both of these. Right click, I'm going to do create replay and trigger in swap set, and I'm going to go and add it into the existing pupils group. And there it is. So now I've got this new one, Dragger 2 showing up down here, and I could name it if I want to. I think I in the example character, I had these named like the compass positions. So I'm going to call this West, and then let's do the same for the next one, add to swap set pupils, and we will call this Northwest. Oops, I accidentally dragged his hand, that's okay. And so I'll keep going through this and adding these into the swap set until I've got all the different positions. All right, so now I've got all of these plugged into a swap set, and what I'm going to do is all the non-default pupils, I'm going to assign some keys to. So I'm going to make this Q and W and so on and so forth. And then I'll select all of these and latch them so they're in place. So now I've created a custom eye system for my character. Now I could have added other eyes to the system, right? I could have the eyes rolling around or, get big or other things I want to do with them. For now, I just kept him pretty basic, but let's go ahead and add all this stuff back on, turn everything back on. And you'll notice as I move my eyes, his eyes aren't working because remember we took the eye gaze away. But now when I press these trigger keys, so when I press Q or W or T or any of these, his eyes are going to go in any direction and smoothly transition from whatever state I'm in to the next. And if I tap one again, it's going to go back to the original default setting. So I press R once, he looks up and to the left, and then I press it again, and they go back to the default. So my advice is this: if you have a character you're creating with these off-centered eyes like Willie does, I think this technique works pretty well. It's not as easy and intuitive as adding the eye gaze and being able to do the, the arrow keys and everything. It's a little more work remembering, okay, I have to press Q to do, this direction or T to do this direction. You can of course create icons for them in the controls panel and things like that. So it's a little more cumbersome, but it does give you that extra level of control. And for my character here, I wanted him to be able to look up into the side or down into the, diagonally. I wanted those diagonals, and this allowed me to have those custom eye positions. So just because eye gaze is a default behavior that we give you with every puppet doesn't mean you have to use it. And if you want that custom level of control, it's there for you. Now, this next one is a little subtle, but it is a nice touch and added detail you can give to your characters. So check out Willie right now. He's moving, he's looking all right, but look at his beard isn't really moving. The mouth doesn't feel as connected to the rest of his body. It kind of feels like it's just kind of floating over top of everything, right? So compare what you're seeing right now to something like this, where as I'm talking, the beard is getting some additional motion and movement. And that's happening because of this parameter under lip sync, jaw movement. If you have something tagged as a jaw in your character, it's going to move up and down as you're talking based off of the height of your mouth shapes. So right now I have this set to 50%. I think for the actual character, I made it a little more subtle. I think it's only like 25%. And for me, subtle is better in this scenario, because if I go like to 100% here, this is going to look really distracting, and I feel like the beard is moving a little bit too much. Now you could do this, but I think you kind of want to be a little more subtle with these sort of things and not make that the focus of attention. I want the rest of his face and his emotions to be the center of attention, and not how much the beard is moving up and down. So what's happening behind the scenes here? Well, I've got this layer called BG, the background, and here's what I did to it. The background layer is basically everything that's behind the rest of the face. This is all just one big layer that's been flattened, and I did two things to it. I made a stick down here that I tagged as a jaw, and then I made a stick up here called fixed. So let's just delete this, and let's just say, I'm just gonna go through the rigging process for scratch and show you. So when this first came in, this was not an independent layer. This was by itself, just this static layer here. And so I added the crown icon. You do need to make it independent to be able to move on its own. And then I went to the stick tool down here. I dragged across here under the nose, and I tagged that as fixed. And then I found somewhere down here, and I tagged that as a jaw, which would be this thing down here, basically the chin that's showing up on the diagram. So now you should notice that your character's jaw is moving, and you should see that where the fixed is, it shouldn't be moving over that. It should only be moving below where you put the fixed. And I'll show you what might change if you wanted to adjust that a little bit. So let's go up here and let's instead make the fixed like right at the eye level or something like that. And now let's try it and see what happens. Okay, test 1, 2, 3. Notice now it's pulling on the ears a little bit. It's really subtle. If I turn this up, you'll be able to see it a little bit more. See how the ears are being affected by it as well? So where that fixed is really important to how much things are moving up and down. Notice the cheeks are moving, these little red cheeks are moving, but the nose and the eyes and all that, those are independent, so those are not affected by this moving. So whatever you want to be moving up and down with the jaw, put that in its own layer, make it independent, and then add those fixed and those jaw tagged sticks, and that's going to work really well for adding additional life to your character. Now, this isn't to say that your character has to have a beard for this to work. It works just as well for characters with chins. So even if Willie was clean shaven, I would still put the fixed handle here under the nose, and I would do the chin, the jaw right at the chin level, maybe even a little bit smaller, and it's still going to give me a little bit of the bounce of the chin, which is again going to add a little bit of extra fluidity and life to the face as I'm talking. Next up is head rotation, and I talked about this in the Lim IK tutorial, but I think it's a technique that can extend to any character Lim IK, regardless of Lim IK, because I think it's really helpful. So by default, your character's head and body are attached. So when I take a character like Chloe here, when I move my head back and forth, notice the body is really moving with the head. The head is really the driver of everything, right? The body is kind of along for the ride, and it's moving wherever the head decides to go. And that's great for most characters, but if you want a little bit of additional rotation, there's a technique you can do to give yourself that. So compare what you just saw with Chloe to Willie here. And notice as I'm moving my head, I've got a lot more control over how much the head tilts without the body, fully tilting and moving with the head as much. It's got a little bit of pull and sway, but it's its own thing. And so these are basically, you're controlling two parts with this technique. You're controlling the head and the body, and you have independent control over how to move them. All right, so the basic way you get this to work is you have two heads, basically. Even though it doesn't look like your character has two heads, what's really going on behind the scenes is you're giving your character two heads. So I did several things with my character. Number one, the structure should look like this. You've got your main character that is not independent. That's different from what we normally tell you. It has a frontal group inside of it, also not what we normally tell you, and that is not independent, also what we normally don't tell you. And that frontal group has been tagged not only as frontal, but also as a head. So over in the tag section, that has been tagged as a head. And then inside that, I've got my head and my body, and this time we're telling you to make the head independent. Again, we don't normally tell you to do that, and you've added an additional behavior to it, the face behavior. So if I select this, I now have an extra face behavior, which is different from the main face behavior that comes in with my character. In fact, the main face behavior, I renamed to body up here. So I selected my top level group up here, my top level character, and then I went to here. This used to be called face. I clicked the menu icon, went to rename behavior, and instead I called this body because really that's what it's going to be controlling. And then to keep my character stuck to the ground, instead of putting the fixed handles in the body group like I normally would, I put them in the Willy group instead. So basically, you're doing 5 or 6 things that I've told you not to do in other tutorials. But if you're at this state, you're probably a little more advanced, and so you're okay with taking things off the rails a little bit and trying a different technique. So what I found with this technique is I really turned down a lot of the parameters in the body behavior, aka the renamed face behavior, and I will really focus on the ones in the main face behavior. So for body, for example, if I changed, position strength up higher, then notice the body's going to move a lot more as I move my head. I probably don't want that. Same with tilt. If I do too much tilt, that's not going to look good either. So I want to keep that pretty far down. So really, I'm scaling back the body because I wanted the body movement to be a little more subtle, and I wanted the head to have a lot more movement. So when I get down to the head movement, I've got my tilt strength, for example, set to 75%. So I get a lot more tilt. Now, of course, I could go even higher with that and move it more, and you'll see it's still this independent thing that's able to move around, or I can make it more subtle if I wanted to. I did change head position strength here though, down more. If I turn this up, then it's going to yeah, you see what's happening. It's going to disconnect from the head. So you really have to fool around with some of this stuff and play around with making certain things 0 and cranking other things up to have this effect. So play around with it. It's a really cool technique. And I think it just adds, for this character, he kind of is tilting his head a lot, shifting back, looking up, looking down, all sorts of stuff like that. And I think it works really well for him, and a lot better than if I just had the minimal controls that the default setup would give me. Next up, the eyebrows. And similar to what I was doing with the pupils, sometimes you want a system that gives you a little bit more fine-tuned control for a particular feature. By default, with the eyebrows, when you tag same as left and right eyebrow, they're going to move with the performance capture. But sometimes you want a little more control over that, right? You want your eyebrows to stay raised, or you want to kind of do a quizzical look, which you can do if you uncheck move eyebrows together. You can move them independently, but then you got to really have, really flexible eyebrows to be able to, get those types of looks. And not everyone's gifted in that realm. So what I like to do with a character like this is create a swap set system where they've got a bunch of different eyebrow states, maybe their default state, slightly raised, kind of angry, maybe kind of that quizzical look, and be able to really quickly swap between them. And for me, that gives me more control. When I want him to be angry, I don't have to focus my face and make sure I'm looking angry at that moment. I have the control of being able to just press a button and do that instead. So it's kind of a, it's all up to you. If you want to do the performance, go for it. But for a character like this, where I want precise timing for those eyebrow positions, doing something like this works a little better. And the way I'm going to do it is actually with keyframes. All right, so in rig mode here, I'm going to get rid of the existing tags for my left and right eyebrow. I don't need them. Character Animator doesn't need to know that these are going to move with performance capture. So I'm getting rid of those, and instead, I'm going to select both of these, go over into my behavior column here, click the plus next to one of these, and add transform behaviors to both of these. What does that mean? Well, that means both of these are now going to allow me to move them position X, Y, scale, rotate, whatever I want to do. So now I have independent control over them. And this works a little bit better than dragger in this case, because dragger, I'd just be able to drag them and move them around. In this case, I also want to rotate them. Maybe I want to scale them up and down a little bit. So I've got a little bit more fine-tuned control with this method. So let's go ahead and set some keyframes for our different eyebrow states. So here I see transformed left eyebrow and right eyebrow have been added to my character. So I'm going to go ahead and make sure I'm set at 0, 0 and start adding keyframes. So I'm going to click the stopwatch icon next to position X, Y, and rotation for each of these, because for the eyebrows, that's probably all I want to do is move them, to the left or right, up and down, and tilt them slightly. So now that I've done that, I've got these 6 keyframes that are showing up over here, and what I'm going to do is create basically a range of this initial starting position from 0 to 1. So I'm going to select all of these. I'm going to copy them, Command C on Mac, Control C on Windows, and at 1 second, I'm going to paste them. Command V on Mac, Control V on Windows. So now I know from 0 to 1, I have a range where in there is going to be my default eyebrow position. Let's change that at 2 seconds. Now I'm going to paste the exact same starting position, but I'm going to change these slightly. I'm going to rotate, this one. Let's say this is my raised position. So I'm going to rotate this one up, and then maybe for the other one, I'm going to raise that a little bit. Maybe I'll move it over a little bit because it's getting lost there in the hat. And let's rotate that one as well. So that's going to be my raised state. And then let's copy this and Command C. Over at 3 seconds, Command V. And now I know anywhere in this range, those eyebrows are going to be raised. So in 0 to 1, they're going to be default. 2 to 3, they're going to be raised. And then let's say from 4 to 5, let me get a copy from the original position and paste them here. So now let's say I want to do kind of a quizzical look for this character. So let's say, one eye is going to be slightly raised like this. Let's bring it up a little bit. And then this other one is going to be kind of lower into the side and down a little bit. So he's not so sure about, whatever he's talking about here. And then again, I'm going to copy these and paste them so I know from 4 to 5, I've got the quizzical look. So I could keep expanding this system as much as I want, but let's say for now I'm going to set it as these are my 3 main eyebrow positions that I care about. And so now I'm going to go through the process of turning them into takes, and then I'm going to blend them, and then I'm going to turn them into replays and triggers. I know that's a lot of character animator jargon I'm throwing out there. Oh yeah, I'm just going to turn them to takes and blend them and replays and trigger. Only 5 people know what I actually just said, right? It's kind of all over the place. There's a lot of terms, but I'm going to walk through it slowly, and hopefully this will make a little more sense when I walk through it step by step. So let's start with these first keyframes. Let's select everything here. I'm going to my 0 to 1, so that whole set of keyframes. I'm going to right-click them, and I'm going to say Create Take from Keyframes. That's going to turn that range of keyframes into recorded takes, just like I was recording them and the keyframes didn't even exist. Let's do the same thing for this second set of keyframes as well. Right-click, Create Take from Keyframes, and then finally my last set. I might have to scroll down a little bit because this is getting a little vertical, and Create Take from Keyframes. Okay, so now I can twirl all these up. I don't care about all the different take positions. All I care about is that I've got data for each of these. At this point, I don't need my keyframes anymore. My keyframes have been converted into takes, and so I can get rid of them. You might want to keep them just to give you peace of mind if you need to go back to them for any reason, but for me, now all I care about are these rectangles. So I'm just going to go through these and delete all of my keyframes. All right, and now that I've done that, let's add the blends. So I'm going to select everything, and just like I did for the pupils, I'm going to click this little blend handle in the upper left corner, drag it just a couple of frames, and then give it a longer tail at the end, something like that. So I have these 3 distinct areas, my default, my raised, and my quizzical look. Okay, and then the blends is going to allow them to seamlessly move between each other. So if I go from raised to quizzical, or default to quizzical, or raised to default, it doesn't matter what direction I go in, they're all going to be smooth, quick transitions. So we need a new swap set for these to live inside. So let's go to plus create swap set, and let's just call this browse. If I could spell it correctly, there we go. And let's start adding things into it. So first I'll select my default, right click, create replay and trigger and swap set, find that new swap set I just created and call it browse. Same with the second one. Let's select those, right click, add into browse, and the third one, the quizzical one, right click and add into browse. Okay, so I know this one was my default. I'm pressing enter to rename these each. This one was my raised, and this one was my quizzical, or you could call it whatever you want. Now that I've got this system, I'm going to set this, my main one, as default. I know that's the one that I always want kind of as my base to come back to. And then these other ones, raised and quizzical, I can set to, let's say, O and P. I think I still have those available. I'll have to check and make sure. And I want to latch both of those. Okay, so if I've set this up correctly now, I've got my default eyebrows. They're not moving with my own eyebrows. But when I press O, I'm going to get the raised. And when I press P, I'm going to get the quizzical. And I can move between these in any variation that I want. And so now I've got an eyebrow system that I can reliably go back to. So I know when I want stuff to be raised, I press this key, it's going to stay raised, and they're both going to stay in one place. All right, that brings us to our last point. And if you've made it this far, I haven't scared you off yet. I'm assuming you're a little bit more advanced. You can handle this. Recording replays. So if you've ever tried to record a character with replays before, particularly replays and a swap set, your timeline can get indecipherable. It can get absolutely insane and just crazy and have all this junk in it. And you're like, what did I just do? How did I record this? And it's really hard to make sense of it. So I'll show you an example of that and how I deal with all of this. So let's take our character here and go to 0. And I'm not going to press anything. I'm just going to record, and I'm not pressing any buttons. I'm just going to move my head around and talk. And that's all I'm doing. It's just doing a basic performance where I'm just doing a few things like this. Now, with those minimal inputs, you wouldn't think that my timeline would look really complicated, right? Well, you are dead wrong, because look at this. Look how much stuff is showing up in my timeline, right? Like eyebrows, I didn't press any buttons for the eyebrows, and pupils and drag it. Like all of this stuff is showing up in my timeline, and it makes it really, really confusing. I look at this and I think this is a mess. Like I don't know what is happening, what I did here. The problem is what's happening is this character has a lot of swap sets, right? So I have swap sets for, the mouth, for the eyelids, for the hands, for the eyebrows, for the pupils, and the arms. And so those 7 or 8 swap sets, if they have a default set, that default is going to record when I press the record button. So the eyebrows, I didn't press any buttons for the eyebrows, but the eyebrows do have a default that is associated with a replay over here. So when I press record, it's saying, oh, okay, you want me to put those takes of the eyebrows and show those in your timeline. That's why I have 6 takes at the bottom here for these eyebrows, because position X, Y, and rotation, it's thinking I want all of those in my timeline, and I want because they were set as my default. So it's basically showing me those were recorded as part of my performance. Now, it's going to be a lot easier. Let's get rid of this. Let's get rid of the defaults for a lot of these swap sets. So I don't want my default for the arms. I don't want my default for the pupils. I already got rid of the one for the eyebrows. Now, if I've got swap sets that don't have replays associated with them, so the mouth is really simple. It's just when I press 1, he gets an upset mouth. If I press it again, he's happy again. If I got rid of this swap set, he doesn't have a mouth. I probably want this character to have a mouth, so I'm going to keep that default on. Same thing with its lids. If I turn that off, well, now he doesn't have any eyes, or his hands. So I'm okay with having defaults if they don't have replays associated with them. That's fine. But where you run into problems and your timeline gets really bloated is when you have a replays associated with those different triggers. So now with all that stuff off, let's see how it goes. I'm going to press record. I'm going to do the same sort of thing where I'm just going to move my head around and talk for a few seconds. And now let's see if our timeline looks any better. So yeah, that is way simpler. This is way easier to decipher, right? I can see all I've got my audio, my lip sync, and then the only reason I'm having 2 things for the body and face is because I did that. I think was it step 3 where I did the separated head and the body. So I'm seeing 2 separate takes for that. So that's much, much simpler, right? It's not recording any triggers because I didn't press any triggers, and I also don't have any default set for those swap sets with replays. So the way that I tackle recording replays is I do them one at a time. I will focus on just the eyebrows or just the pupils or just the hand positions, and I will only set the default for when I am recording that particular section. And when I'm done with it, I'm going to turn that default off and I'm going to move on to the next one. So I'll show you what I mean. So let's say I wanted to record a take with pupils. So I'm going to set now, make sure all my other defaults are off for anything with replays in it, any swap sets with replays. I'm going to turn the default back on for pupils. And then over here on the right, I don't care about any of this other stuff. All I care about is triggers. That's the only thing that I'm worried about right now. So that's the only behavior that I'm going to arm. And then I would press record. And if I'm dealing with an audio track or whatever, I can, press buttons. And you'll see as I'm doing that, I'm doing his different eye positions. And when I press something twice, it's going to go back to the default position. And I'm just listening to what the audio would be saying and doing a recording like that. Okay, so let's say that's good. I stop it. And now I've got my takes that are showing up here. Now, it might show up like this by default. If it does, don't be scared. just go over here and twirl it up until it's using the little carrots over here to twirl it up into something that looks a little bit nicer. And now I know that I've got my eye, position. I can get rid of the audio here. There are all my eye positions. And if I really want to dig in and, say, okay, here, I want to move this one later or earlier, I have the ability to do that. But most of the time, I'll try to get it right. I'll try to say, okay, I'm going to record for 5 or 10 seconds, and I'm going to perform these eyes going in these directions. I'm going to stop when it gets back to the default, and then let's move on to the next 10 seconds or the next 15 seconds or whatever you want to do. Okay, and now when that is set, all done, I'm happy about that. I can use this nice little shy icon. This is saying we added in the last release. I can turn the shine on for these and make them shy, which means they will hide when I do the shy toggle. And then I can just click this little shy guy up here, hide shy, and that's gonna make them go away. So I don't need to see them anymore. I don't need to see them in my timeline. Instead, I can focus on whatever's next. So let's say I want to move on to the eyebrows now. So I can turn off pupils, the default for pupils, and turn it on for eyebrows. And now I can go through a similar step where I press record, and let's see, I've got like N, Z, X, those are my different keys. So I can listen and do the different positions as I want, press them like that, whatever I've got, stop, and now I'm going to get, again, a really scary timeline at first with like these staircases, but I can twirl those open, or twirl those up. And because I did the keyframes for X, Y, and rotation, all of those are showing up. So it does look a little bit crazy. Like all these tracks for eyebrows, that's a little crazy. We know this and we want to make this better in the future and we have plans to do that. But for now, this is how I have to deal with it. So now I've just got my eyebrow track and that's looking pretty good. And if I did the unshine here, I would see my dragger tracks, my pupils as well. And if I wanted to move on to the next thing, okay, let's add maybe shy these guys as well and get rid of them, hit the hide shy and move on to the next step. So that's my process for moving through this stuff is do it one at a time, record it, turn those defaults on only for the recording, and then turn it back off. And your timeline will look a lot nicer, and it makes a lot more sense kind of going through it step by step like this. And that's it. So hopefully there was something in here that everyone got something interesting or something you didn't know about before. These are more advanced techniques, but really this will help separate your character from beginner type characters and make it feel a little bit more professional, a little bit more polished, and give you a little bit of extra control. We would love to see anything you've made with this, so please use #CharacterAnimator when sharing on social media any of these techniques. We'd love to see what you're working on, and if you have any questions about anything I've talked about here or any other issues you're running into, the best place to ask questions or search for answers to existing questions is the official Character Animator forums. That's it for me for 2020. I'm looking forward to much better times in 2021. Thanks so much for watching and have fun.